How are you doing today, man?
Doing great.
Well, I'm glad to finally get you on the podcast. I know we've been trying to coordinate this one for quite some time, and I appreciate you being patient with us. But for everyone that's listening and they haven't heard of what you do, you have a project called Arcology that you've been working on for quite some time, and it's, from what I understand, like a comprehensive system for the future, right? And I'll let you explain it a little bit better than that. But what is Arcology? How long have you been working on it, and what motivated you to start that?
So I first hatched the idea in 2017, and it was strictly mass-produced cheap skyscrapers. That was how all it started out as, and it's kind of morphed into this like giant civilizational project. Arcology is the skyscrapers and the infrastructure, and then there's also what I call the Trinity Contracts, which is this like political constitution that surrounds the system as well.
So you've been working on it since 2017?
Yeah, that's when I first hatched it.
Mm-hmm. And you have a YouTube channel dedicated to explaining this and your concepts of the future, right?
Yes, Traveling Through Time is the channel.
Perfect. So if you're once you're done listening to this episode, if you want to learn more about traveling and his projects, make sure to check out his YouTube channel, Traveling Through Time on YouTube. And so, what in your opinion, what are some of the biggest problems that we see going into the future?
Housing is probably number one presently. Mm-hmm. That's more of like a short to medium term. And then a long-term issue is sustainability and entropy. So things like landfills and resource depletion, things like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about housing. What issues do you see coming down the road for us in terms of housing? And is this something that you see, globally, or is it just the United States? Or
it seems to be the Western world, so like Europe, Australia, Canada, things like this. Australia and Canada are actually worse than the United States, shockingly.
Really? So with housing, I know it's clear that housing prices are going up, but where do you see the problem with that? Like, how do you break it down? And what's your solution?
There's multiple solutions, and I think there's multiple problems. One of them is like landlords, both corporate and individual, gobbling up supply. And then there's also inflation from fiat money, which is another problem. And then a third problem is just kind of like overpopulation and a lack of supply. And the Arcology system addresses the construction and supply. And then the Trinity Contracts actually addresses the landlord problem as well.
You mentioned the fiat standard, right? And explain that to someone who may not know what that means. Like, what is the fiat standard, and how does it play a role in our life?
So the fiat standard actually stands for by decree. It's not simply paper. It means the government declares their own currency as currency, and you're forced to use it and you're forced to accept it. So Bitcoin is actually not fiat money. People make that mistake all the time. And what it does is it empowers the financial institutions around the central bank, and it empowers the government and makes the government this like central thing in our society. And it just becomes this like encompassing, consuming beast, really.
Mm-hmm. And is that what people mean when they say like the federal notes and federal dollars and things like that? Like it's so postmodern, really. Like this idea of like the money is not based on anything besides the fact that it's just we say so.
Oh yeah, well this has happened several times throughout history, and more than several, probably like 50, and it always ends in economic disaster. So that's where we're headed.
It seems that way. I mean, I remember seeing that within the last like 2 years, it's 2022 right now, and since the beginning of the pandemic, we've printed like 75% of all of the money in circulation for the US dollar.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm surprised we don't have $10 gas, to be quite honest with you.
Well, it seems like that might be where we're going right now. I know, things are getting way more expensive. There's shortages going on, and it seems like we're on the cusp of some sort of new financial system being brought forth. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think crypto is probably going to be the future. So beware of that, everyone.
Well, do you think that like the government is going to try to create its own crypto system, or do you think it's going to be like a decentralized, have all of these different coins and all of them being used?
Ideally, both. I'm obviously in favor of both. There's the central bank digital currencies, which they already said they're interested in creating. My system, the Trinity Contracts, allows for gold, silver, and cryptocurrency, but there's no fiat actually. So it tries to address the central banking issue as well.
I see, and how would that put us in a different situation than when we are now with the fiat? How does crypto provide a solution to that? Do you believe? I'm really ignorant of the entire thing, so I don't know, but I'm curious what you think about it. What are the pros of cryptocurrency?
So people always have this assumption that there's going to be inflation and that prices are going to rise, and that's a symptom of money printing. So it's hard to imagine this, but just imagine a world with 0% inflation. So you know that in 30 years, your Arizona iced tea is still going to cost 99 cents 30 years from now. And same with housing, same with financial assets and stuff. So like stocks will still fluctuate, but not nearly as much as they do now. And it's really going to have like a grounding effect in the economy. Everything will have like a sense of permanence to it, which is what it should be, right? It should have a sense of permanence.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we're lacking now. I think, throughout human history, there's always been this sense of stability, right? You had a community that you could fall back on. You had a family structure that would support you if things were to go bad. You had forms of social welfare and things like this, but it seems like we're rapidly breaking down into a more isolated world where there's less and less safety nets really to catch you. And I think that, currency is at the backbone of that. If your money is losing value and it's like you're trying to fill water into a bucket with holes in it, well, then how do you try to build a stable system off of that, And I think that is a lot of what we're seeing right now with all the money printer going burr. But another problem, that we have is sort of the lack of infrastructure and the decaying infrastructure that we're seeing across the Western world. I know where I live in the Midwest, and there's all of these bridges that are always breaking down, and the roads are terrible. It's almost like some places down here it's almost like you're traveling back in time to like the beginning of the 19th or the 20th century, really. And it's where do you see innovation in terms of infrastructure?
So this is a huge one. This is like the big red pill, or should I say white pill, that I've had. And that even in cities, even in Manhattan, we don't really have three-dimensional infrastructure. We don't have three-dimensional cities because the ground level is still two-dimensional. The road is still two-dimensional. So in arcology, the main innovation is that the city is legitimately three-dimensional. So when you're sitting in your room, you have city 360 degrees around you, all the way up, all the way down, all the way to the left, to the right, and the front and the back. It's just this solid block of city. And you might say like, oh, that sounds terrifying, but it actually allows everything to be within walking distance of you. Like you can get to like anywhere you need to go in the city in under 10 minutes walking. Like legitimately walk anywhere in the city in 10 minutes. And the thermal efficiencies are like through the roof. So your heating bills are legitimately zero.
Mm-hmm. And, so what you're describing, it almost reminds me of like Futurama, where there's different layers to the city. Is that what you're describing?
Yeah. So the city would have between like 3 to 8 layers, and each layer is 3 stories.
And what kind of, infrastructure is required to support something like that? Obviously, people wouldn't really be able to use cars, would they?
The largest vehicle would be like a golf cart or a forklift. But it wouldn't be able to handle anything more than that. And
so the vehicles would be designed just to navigate through like these, little channels that are already established within this the system that you're describing?
There would be a road system, yeah. But the vehicles would be limited by weight and size. So like those one wheels would be very, very common. A bicycle, if you want to use a bicycle, rollerblades even. And what's beautiful about the three-dimensional infrastructure is there could be a blizzard outside, and all of the roads will be 70 degrees and dry and comfortable. So you could bike to work in 5 minutes in a total blizzard and not even know it's a total blizzard.
I remember when I was growing up, I read this sci-fi novel called Roar. And basically it takes place in the future, and humans are living very much in a society like you're describing right now. And the problem in the book is that there begins to develop this hierarchy where only the elite, right, were able to live on the top layer of this society. Within your framework, how do you prevent something like that from occurring, where sunlight becomes a commodity and only the very elite aristocrats are have the means to be able to get sunlight or see rain or snow? All these things would be gatekept within this system, right?
So sunlight does become a commodity slightly. There's nothing you can really do about that from a physics standpoint. Mm-hmm. But in the legal system, it is written into the Constitution that the rooftops are open to the general public. And all of the rooftops are actually seamless because it's one massive building, it's one massive structure. And so the entire rooftop is essentially like your Central Park, or the equivalent of a Central Park. Yeah. And then these cities would be built in rural areas where there's a lot of undeveloped land. Mm-hmm. And so you would go from this like massive density city to essentially like potentially old growth forests with gardens, like with nothing in between them. There's no gap. It goes from 100 to 0.
Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like what you're describing reminds me of the smart cities that you hear, people like Klaus Schwab and all those globalists sort of talk about. But it sounds like yours, is more for the people, right? Not so much to enslave, but rather to increase the quality of life while living in a system that can support the amount of the population growth that we're seeing. But how do you feel about things like, I know with the smart cities, one big thing is they want, everyone to be, marked with like a microchip or something to gain access. How do you feel about things like that? Do you think that, like, in terms of, how we see the world going, do you think that's like a possibility?
I don't want it to be. That's not where I want it to go.
Yeah.
So the beauty of reality that people don't really understand is we generate our own reality. We generate our own social structures through consent and through contract. So contract law is like a serious red pill. It opens up vistas to you. More a white pill, actually. It's a great thing. So contract law, this is actual law. I'm not lying to you. I'm not making this up. Contract law says I can write down anything I want on a sheet of paper, and if Oaks and his Discord server agrees to it, then that is the law between you and I. So contract law has like this weird artistic infinity to it that people don't really comprehend. They don't really understand.
I see. So with what you're saying, like, do you think that these sorts of communities that you're describing with arcology, do you think that they even require, I guess, like a government, or are you saying, is what you're saying, like, you could create this yourself and just through contract law have your own, 3D city as you're describing, or do you think this is something that the government would eventually adopt going forward?
Well, yeah, the contract is the government, right? The contract creates the institution that we call the government, quote unquote.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and so you can get really, really creative, and you can get have these novel, weird ideas that like are totally based, and you're like, huh, you can really do that? And it's like, yeah, it's the contract law. You just write it down. Whatever you speak into being becomes the truth. At least in your little commune, your little city.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, when you get into like the bad timeline, if we want to call it that, where we're all living in smart cities and we're all microchipped and taking happy pills, it's like, I guess the goal would be for the elites to sell this to the population as if it was a good thing, right? And I think with how things are going in terms of potential food shortages and inflation, I bet after a few years of this, where things getting bad, I think a lot of people would be willing to give up all of their freedoms and autonomy to live in one of these systems. And then that creates the consent. It's almost like manufacturing consent. And I think I almost part of me worries that that's what we're sort of seeing right now.
Yeah. I feel like they're trying to scare us into like wanting a savior, and then they'll push themselves as the savior. Mm-hmm. When the truth is that we can save ourselves, we have the ability to save ourselves, and we just have to make the right choice, really. And the whole Trinity Contracts, the legal part of the whole concept, is trying to be proactive and move towards a solution. Move towards like a protopian solution instead of the dystopian solution.
Yeah, and I think that's why we need people like you out there coming up with systems like this and coming with ideas for the future, because I think right now there's so many people that are just completely demoralized. Like I guess they might get a little glimpse of what's coming, and they're just like, well, I'd rather just sit and play video games all day and watch porn and just hope that everything works out. But you take the time to actually invest. I mean, you have how many videos on your YouTube channel?
The main one has 333 videos.
So yeah, you have all these videos and resources dedicated to providing people with this understanding of how to build a better future. And I think that's why it's so important what you do. And I hope people listening to this are, they feel inspired and white-pilled after this, because it doesn't have to be the bad timeline, right? It's like, as you're saying, we consent to the world that we live in. And I think what we're seeing right now through, these manufactured crises that we're seeing, we're seeing pestilence, we're seeing famine, we're seeing war. And it's almost as if the Klaus Schwabs, the global elite, they're trying to almost simulate this collapse, so then everyone will welcome these new smart cities with open arms. But I think what you describe in your system is much more utopian rather than dystopian.
Oh, absolutely. I'll throw out some goodies for the audience. So we have a UBI of $360 average that scales with age and slowly turns into Social Security. So you actually start getting a UBI at 10 years old, and you actually get your adulthood. You get the right to like buy property and be gainfully employed at 10 years old. So you could actually see 10-year-olds owning their own apartments and having a job as like a cashier or like stocking shelves or something, which is like so weird. In our present society, there's like 40-year-olds who can't afford a house. And in this society, you can actually start your life at 10 years old, potentially. And then there's profit sharing among corporations. So when you work for a corporation, you have a percent ownership in that corporation. For most corporations, it's like 30 to 60% worker owned. So that's profits and ownership of the actual corporation. And then there's a direct democracy system, which is for changing tax rates. And there's a charity market. So you actually vote for charities, and how many votes the charity gets determines their annual budget from taxation. So there's all these super cool neat little features in the Constitution that become possible when you kind of step away from this whole like left versus right, Republican versus Democrat news cycle, which is like a black hole. It's a psychological black hole that we all kind of fall into continuously and like try to claw our way out of. It's like the Sarlacc pit from Star Wars. That's what the news is. That's what the Republicans and the Democrats are. And once you fully embrace contract law and the potential of contract law and the potential of like the Declaration of Independence and things like this, then it really opens up a whole new world to play in and to explore.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds a lot better than living in the pod and eating bugs and owning nothing, because with your system there is ownership, right? But in terms of let's talk about the living situations that you've designed. How is it different from living in the pod? Because I know that's a concern of many people these days, is that we're going to, by here come 2030, we're all going to be shoved into pods that we have to rent and eat bugs in and whatnot.
So every hexagon is like a warehouse. It's an empty warehouse. You can do whatever you want with it. And you own that 3-dimensional airspace, that 3-dimensional steel structure in arcology. So all of the real estate will be developed by people who have like sovereign control over their 3-dimensional airspace. And then the rooftop is the domain of the government, specifically an artistic council. So it's our artistic council that works for the government. And so the government will make the rooftop as beautiful as possible. And then the core of the city is up to all of the decentralized owners who own their space. So I've been making blueprints, 3-dimensional blueprints for what the inside might look like. And I have developed what I lovingly call pods. It's like, part of the meme. It's part of a joke. But these pods are actually 200 square feet. And you can stand up inside of them. They're 10 feet high. So it's 8 by 22 by 10 feet high. So they're not really they're more like tiny apartments or like tiny houses than pods. Mm-hmm. And the price range for the pods was like $8,000 to $30,000, and you get this like massive shared space with your roommates. So there's a lot of communal blueprints, which some people might love and adore, and some people might be like kind of not too thrilled with. If you don't want roommates, you're going to be paying more for your apartment, like $30,000 to $50,000. But almost all of my blueprints are under $100,000. Like the vast majority are even under $50,000.
And because of the shape of like the hexagon, it's like theoretically you could just kind of keep adding on to this 3D city. Like if you need to add more hexagon cells in, you can just expand it, right, based off of the need of the population.
Yeah, there's limits vertically, but horizontally is pretty much infinite. The vertical limits I think are like 40 stories right now, or 50 stories, but I wouldn't even really go that high. I mean, it depends on the city, right? If the city wants to increase the density, then they'll build up. If they don't want to increase the density, they'll build outward. But
oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna ask you, how, like, people like me, I'm very much a hermit. So I'm very interested in living in solitude out in the woods. Is there a role for that within this, or is it you have to live in the smart city, or you cannot come in, or like kind of like this, what role does that play within your framework that you've designed?
So this is to replace existing cities and to kind of consume suburbia too. But it is not replacing the farmer, and it is not replacing like rural towns. And another thing,
it sounds like a great alternative to like the city and like urban and suburban layout, because like when I grew up in a very rural area, like I grew up in like a coal mining area, population less than 1,000. I knew every single person in my village. And when I went to college, I moved up to the city, and I saw the suburbs for the first time, and it made me feel just gross, just seeing all these like duplicate houses just all laid out like that. I just was like, this is like such a waste of space, and it just seems so gross. And to hear like what you describe, it sounds like a much more efficient system, especially for like the rising population that we're going to see continue increase. But what were you gonna say before I interrupted you?
So I have a couple videos on this where the node size. If you think of cities as like nodes, what really is more important is the size of the node and not necessarily the density. So when you get to like a node size of 250,000 or 500,000, then you start to like drown in a sea of humanity. And once you shrink that node size to like 100,000 or 50,000, you could have extremely high population density with arcologies, and therefore no vehicles and no car requirements. And you still get the efficiency requirements, but it's still like that small town atmosphere and everyone knows each other, even though it's super high density, because you're limiting the population of the arcology to like 25,000 or 50,000.
And what do you mean by a node?
Like one point on the map. One arcology.
Okay.
I call arcologies like nodes, or a lot of people call them arcs for short. Like, hey, this is my arc.
And let's talk about really quickly just the name arcology, because we've talked about this in the past, and I think it's really really clever. But what made you come up with the name for your project?
Okay, so trigger warning. It was originally called Ancapistan. It was the original name for it. It was actually it was unum first, which is one in Latin, because it's one city made out of like potentially thousands of identical pieces, like a single-celled organism. So it was unum, and then it was Ancapistan, and now it's arcology, which is what I'm going to stick with. But an arcology is an entire city in one building. It's an actual scientific terminology, but it's with a C instead of a K. I changed it to a K for like the biblical connotations, like Noah's Ark, which I think is like brilliant and poetic.
No, because the way I see it is like, we're being flooded with all of this woo, right? Like the paradigm is being consumed, and it's all, no institution is doing well right now. That's what I say. No college is doing well, no government is doing well, no religion is doing well. All of their numbers are down. The support is down for institutions, and it sounds like what you've tried to do with your project is create this system in which we can build the arc throughout this deluge of ontology, this woo deluge that we're seeing flood the paradigm. You're trying to create the system that can go with these changing tides and these I think that's arcology. Like you've built the arc that can take the humans to the future, and I think it's a noble task, and I think that the things that you describe in the infrastructure you've created, it gives me a very optimistic outlook on the future. I like that. I like that a lot, because there's all this black pilled stuff. You go on the internet and you say, by 2030 we're all going to be eating bugs and living in the pod, and global warming, all this stuff. But you're out here providing solutions. We need more people doing stuff and trying to come up with ideas rather than just throw in their hat and say I give up.
Absolutely, we are all slaves to pessimism. Like our minds are just naturally drawn to it, almost from like an evolutionary sense. And I was that exact same way for a very long time, until I kind of like had to tell myself no, like you be the change, right? Everyone always says that phrase, but like how many people actually live it out? It's hard to. It really is.
And let's dive into 1 second. So let's talk about like the left and right political breakdown. Like we sort of talked about that a little bit, but it's almost like the system we have now, it allows for both sides, right? The left and right. It's always been this two-party bipartisan system in America, and it allows for each party to point fingers at one another, and it kind of creates like this black hole, as you're describing, where nothing really gets done, and everyone just says, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys and they cause the problems, and then the other side will say we're the good guys but they're the bad guys who caused all the problems, right? There's no accountability really.
Yeah, absolutely. And the left and the right is 1 or 0. It's like good or evil. It's the most like binary, normie, like simplistic way of thinking. Something that everyone needs to do, I encourage all your listeners to do, is if you're thinking politically, or should I say sociologically, you have to isolate every single policy. You have to isolate every single idea. You can't create dogma. You can't create ideology, because the ideology is, it's just a trap. It's an intellectual trap.
And what is your solution to this, the political side of things with your arcology framework that you've created? What does politics look like in your model?
Well, it's sort of like enlightened centrism, but I don't want to use that word because then people think of like Joe Biden. I call it's lib center on the political compass. And so what I've pretty much done for the last 3 years, that's how old the contract is you look at every single policy and you say, okay, who does this benefit? Who does this hurt? Why would a city want this policy and why would a city not want this policy? And if a lot of policies are also a gray area, it's like a sliding scale. So then you have to add numbers to the policy and say like, okay, it's like working knobs on a soundboard, right? If you want to have the song sound perfect, you need to get all of the knobs at the right setting, and then you're like, it's just this amazing like sound orgasm, right? A real constitution, like a great constitution, is really grounded in mathematics and is really grounded in algorithms, and the mathematics actually do a lot of the governing. And the variables of the algorithms actually do a lot of the governing.
So would there be politicians in your system?
So, in one version, there's a monarch who pretty much just does hiring and firing, and then he also pitches ideas to the direct democracy once a year. And then there's another version of the system that just replaces the monarch with like 6 elected people, and they have the exact same responsibilities. So
with arcology and your social contract, you propose the idea of having direct democracy, right? So you'd basically have everyone go out and be able to vote on whatever instead of having what we have now in America, quote unquote, the representative democracy, what you're proposing is a direct democracy, right?
So I call it a direct democracy approval, meaning the direct democracy just approves of changes.
Okay.
So they're not really governing. They're just rubber stamping the people who are governing. So it's like a veto too. And in the direct democracy, you actually need a supermajority to make changes. So the minority can actually veto changes with a direct democracy process.
Yeah, and it seems like a representative democracy makes sense in a world before the internet. But it's like now, whatever issue, whatever policy, whatever it is, you could have it go out and have like a 24-hour poll on some app that everyone can just have on their pre-installed on everyone's devices, and then every single person that wants to contribute can go out and just vote. And instead of having politicians, instead of having people go out and make policy with the system we have now, it seems like it makes so much more sense just to have everyone be able to just cast a vote on their phone.
Yeah, and I want to keep in mind for the audience, this is on the city level too. So every single city has a different legal structure, different tax rates, a different constitution potentially, and so the direct democracy is only voting for their town or arcology of like 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm. And then is there anything that keeps these communities bound to one another? Like, from one arcology to another?
There is a contract for a military alliance, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that's just too deep of a rabbit hole. It's interesting stuff. I've always thought the idea of having this sort of, being able to vote just on a device through a direct democracy makes so much more sense for the modern world than having politicians meet and do everything behind closed doors. Yeah, it's how else do you apply the sort of technological advancements that we have now to your concept? Things like the internet. Where else how else do you integrate them into your system?
I don't know. It's mostly mostly analog. So I built the government in Excel spreadsheet. it's like 100 kilobytes. I operate on the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. So I will probably have to hire like 5 programmers for some things here and there, but I'm trying to stay as distanced from Silicon Valley as possible, and I'm trying to stay grounded in my own skill sets in Microsoft Office and and reality as much as possible. One of my big
you go.
One of my big complaints with the ANCAPs and that whole crowd is we have all of these problems in physical reality, like reality, right? And they're just running into the digital realm, into these digital caves as fast as possible. And then they're hiding in the metaverse, and they're hiding in these digital worlds. Everyone seems to be doing this, actually, not just ANCAPs. And I'm trying to like craft this beautiful white pill and show it to the world and say, listen, we can make reality more beautiful than you could possibly imagine. We could have a nonstop party and celebration of reality if we just reform our infrastructure, if we reform our political system, and if we come together and follow the path, right? Follow the path before us.
I think that's a beautiful message, and I one thing I want to rack your brain on is things like with Elon Musk buying Twitter. Is there, within how you look at the world, like where is a platform like Twitter, like this virtual town hall? It seems like that is it seems like it's so new, but there's no current legislation in our system right now to really support it. How do you feel about, is Twitter a public good, or how do you feel about things like that, and how does it integrate into your vision for the future?
Well, we're going to have the internet, and we're going to have Twitter. I was actually going to use like radios as a form of communication in arcology. Like start your own radio stations, and then you could have like 10 radio stations for each arc, and you can just kind of like hop between them, right? Have like like little FM relays and stuff. And then since the city is so small, you can just walk to the radio station and be like, "Hey, when can you put me on?" Right?
Mm-hmm. I think like having the support for like a radio station like system is the future, because you see now, podcasting is so big, and it's like basically, it's like a decentralized radio station, and I think things like the legacy media and news and syndicate broadcasting, like all that stuff is like, I don't think that young people really vibe with it too much.
Well, if there was a real community behind it, I think it would be different. It's so corporate. Mm-hmm. Everything's so corporate.
Exactly.
And I guess you're right. Podcasts, the nice thing about podcasts is they're always available. You don't have to like tune in at a specific time. So, that would definitely be a great avenue. But like, these are all tools that already exist, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Everyone's always trying to reinvent the wheel. And that's something that I think is very foolish and kind of a waste of time. And that's why I've focused so much on the 3D infrastructure and the new constitutions. Because like no one else seems to really be doing it, so. Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work. It's quite the task to take on, but it's all we have everything that we need, I guess, to create a much better world. It's all about breaking the mold, right? Breaking from the patterns and the conditioning that we have now, and trying to create a better world. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost. It's hard to take that step. But you are quite the futurist, right? So you're taking this on, and you're sort of leading the way as like a pioneer into the future as you travel through time, right? But what advice do you have for people in terms of with their own personal paradigm of breaking from the mold?
I would say 2 grams of mushrooms with close friends.
That'll certainly do it.
Yes, it will. It'll help for sure.
I think that things like mushrooms and meditation and yoga, they're good at sort of restoring the neuroplasticity in your mind to help look at things from a new perspective.
Absolutely. I've done acid before, but I don't think it has some physical toxicity to it. If you want to stay away from acid, just read about ergot poisoning, ERGOT, because that's what acid is derived from. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give you some spoilers. Your limbs actually die and then rot and then fall off.
From ergot poisoning?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Like your fingers turn black and fall off.
Yeah, isn't ergot poisoning like what people think happened during like the Salem witch trials? Like where people are claiming they're seeing witches flying around the sky, but they're actually just... Because it grows on like wheat, doesn't it?
Yeah, like barley, I think. It's a type of mold. It's the poison that the mold produces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so don't do that. Well, let me think. Where are we?
Yeah, people have this weird conception that mushrooms and acid are the same thing, just because like both make you have visual hallucinations. But mushrooms are actually much healthier for the body.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard that quite a bit from the psychedelic advocate community. And where do psychedelics fit into your vision of the future? I know now that they're illegal in most places, but you're seeing some states, some cities start to legalize things like mushrooms and what's the other one that people are legalizing? I think some places have legalized like ketamine and MDMA for medical use.
So there are sin taxes for recreational drugs, as well as meat and dairy. So meat and dairy have sin taxes. And 90% of those funds go to the UBI system, and then 10% of the funds go towards the government administration. So what's cool is the entire government is built in Microsoft Excel. So I can actually show you all of the numbers that the entire government operations are made out of, and all of the algorithms that run the government.
Ah, that's very interesting. So it's all... Instead of having all this bureaucratic red tape having to do everything, you've essentially automated the role of that just using Microsoft Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, even the citizen database is in Excel. So the entire system is in Microsoft Excel. And then I could just have a programmer write some code that reads the Excel spreadsheet and then creates a bunch of Bitcoin transactions for the UBI. So I would literally walk into the bureaucratic office one day, like click a button on my computer, everything is calculated, all the Bitcoin transactions are made, and then I send out all of the UBI to the entire city, and then I go home for 30 days. I'm done.
So what is the role of government then within your system if it's all automated?
Well, the courts there's still a court system.
Okay.
That'll be a bit of work for the judges specifically. But the government in my system is like 5% of GDP. It's quite small. It's a lean, mean fighting machine. And most of what society does is the free market, is the private sector. And I just want to reassure everyone, I'm actually a supporter of like partial worker ownership, like 50% worker ownership or like 65% worker ownership. So there's also a contract for that, which redesigns corporations and corporate ownership, which is really cool, probably another podcast, but that is also like something that has been explored through contract law.
And, I think that we certainly have like the resources to make this world possible. You're able to do all of this with just Microsoft Excel, spreadsheet, keep it simple, right? But, it seems like there's so much invested interest in the existing paradigm, right? That's what everything is built on. So it seems like we would have to see some sort of very catalytic event in order to get the gears going and turning to seeing how much of a priority reinventing this. Well, it's not even reinventing, but just reintegrating this automated infrastructure and creating your concept of arcology. It seems like we have some growing pains to go through.
Absolutely. In that regard, I kind of see my black pills as like an ally, right? It's the other half of the yin yang. So I made this meme that I'm a big fan of. It's a yin yang. On one side of the yin yang is crisis, which is what like everyone's going through. And then on the other side is arcology, which is opportunity.
Well, that's kind of like what the yin yang is. I mean, it's creation on one and destruction on the other.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that like, not to be like it seems like, no institution is doing well. That's like what I keep telling myself. It's like, what the Catholic Church is losing supporters. The people are distrusting the government. People are not going to college as much. All these institutions are just breaking down. And it's nice to hear, there's people out there that are planning, and trying to do what they can to create a better future. It gives me, it's a little bit of a white pill, as you said.
Well, truth be told, I'm going to need a lot of help because there's a lot of artwork to be done. There's a lot of interiors to be done. And then physical labor, too, just like hauling it in reality. I think I estimated 5,000 people could construct one of these cities in like 3 years. So if those people are working part-time, you have 5,000 people for 6 years to build one of these cities. So, we're talking potentially physical like 6 years of physical labor to make these things a reality.
And I think that, that's the kind of thing that I think we're going to see more of in the future. I think that people are looking for new systems and new ways of doing things, and I think that you've created quite the foundation and justification for such change with the work that you've done. Is there anything else that you would like to share about arcology and your projects while we have this time? We've got about maybe 15, 30 minutes left.
I guess if we have 30 minutes left, I could talk about the articles of syndication, which is the corporate ownership.
Sure.
So, I noticed I've tried to start a couple of corporations in my life, and I've always noticed there's 3 parts of every corporation that are kind of unseen and people don't talk about. And it's the coin, which is financing, and then the mind, which is like creative, artistic talent, and founders, the people that construct the institution, the people who innovate in the institution. And then there's the hand, which is the general laborers, right? And each third of this corporation, they serve like a certain role. They serve a certain function. And you can't have a corporation if you're missing any one of those 3 sectors. And what's really peculiar with our modern capitalist system is that the coin has 100% ownership of the corporation, and the coin has 100% say over where the profits go and where the profits are allocated to. And so the articles of syndication does what one would naturally do, and that is to give ownership of the corporation as well as profits of the corporation to the hand and the mind and the coin, all 3 of this trifecta. And different industries might have different percentages, but each group is like a walled garden. I don't know if you know the concept with like Android or something, but a walled garden essentially means like isolation on purpose. So the coin is isolated from the mind is isolated from the other 2, and the hand is isolated from the other 2. So by isolating them, they're not competing for ownership in the corporation. It's like written into the contract. So like a restaurant might have like a 50% hand ownership, a 50% labor ownership. And then a steel foundry, since it requires so much capital and requires so much money to create, it might have like a 50 or 60% coin ownership, because a steel foundry doesn't need very much labor, but it costs, like $100 million to manufacture the thing. So the coin is more necessary in a steel foundry, and the labor in a restaurant is more necessary. So each industry will have like a different percentages, but the percentages are written into the contract that creates the corporation. So, yeah, and then there's a governing structure over the ownership of the coin, the mind, and the hand. Each one has their own separate governance. So hand is per hour. So like if you're working 40 hours a week, you get 40 points per week or whatever. And then the mind is like per innovation. So every time you create something new that benefits the corporation, like if you work for a movie studio or something like that, the mind will be central to the movie studio. And then for the coin, it's pretty much like stocks, like a stock system. So, yeah, that completely redesigns. It's like a huge reform of what we traditionally think of as capitalism. And it's more of like mutualism, which a lot of people might not be familiar with. But mutualism is like, once again, the lib center on the political compass. It's like, I don't want to say like free market socialism, because socialism has all these different weird definitions. But it's like worker ownership, right? Mutualism is like worker ownership of corporations. So you still have the free market, you still have free enterprise, but workers get profit sharing and they get partial ownership of the corporation.
How would you best describe, I guess, this system? Besides using arcology or mutualism, it doesn't quite sound like capitalism. It's almost like this. It sounds like you've created like this system that can. It sounds almost like anarchy, but it's all tied together through this constitution, this contract that you've created. That's very loosely, I guess, tied together and very flexible.
Yeah, it's all contract law. The whole thing is contract law. I started out as like a Democrat, and then I started out and I went to like a Ron Paul guy, and then someone sent me to the anarcho-capitalist subreddit, and I was like, whoa, these are some weird people. They're like trashing the U.S. Constitution, and they say like we need something to replace it. And a huge focus of anarcho-capitalism is contracts, like your consensual contracts that you form with other people, that you create with like groups of people and things of that nature.
Right, like the non-aggression principle.
Yeah. But they worship landlords though. I hate that so much. It's like the downfall of the ideology. But like I said earlier, like don't subscribe to dogma, don't subscribe to ideology, and you'll find yourself like in a much more enlightened place.
Yes, dogma is a drug, and most people are addicts. I think that people don't realize that, ideology alters your state of mind, similar to many illicit substances.
Yeah, it's like a fight or flight. When you like go against the ideology, like people attack you like they're animals. It's so bizarre.
Mm-hmm. It's because I think that, humans were abstract creatures, and I think ideology is our mental territory. So the same way that, if you go into a dog's territory, it might get aggressive, right? It's the same. Humans have this abstract, mental, symbolic territory that they identify with, and they, it's part of their bio-survival security. It's like a evolutionary instinct that we've developed as social mammalian creatures. But the system that you've designed, it seems too good to be true, right? Who will build the roads? It reminds me of like the criticisms of ANCAP, as you were saying, but it just seems like such a good system, and it seems so simple that I just wonder why we haven't we seen this before? What do you think are some of the drawbacks of our ecology? Is there anything that you think is like a potential con?
I just made a video about that. It's coming out tomorrow. So, it was like a 20-minute video though, so I don't want to get
give us a little taste.
Like cultural decay would be one. What else? The military system is very different, very chaotic. It's a free market military system. So, and there's no borders.
So a lot of private military contractors.
Yeah, it's like Blackwater, rule by Blackwater. But except you're choosing where your money goes, just like the free market. So it's totally possible that this like theocratic military could arise, and like the Vatican is going to rule the world with like an iron fist, but in like a free market sense, because it's like the market is this like weird democratic collective, if you haven't noticed this, and that's kind of what I love about it, and that's kind of why I'm drawn to it over and over and over again when I write these contracts. And I just had this like ANCAP's one of the nuts that they couldn't crack is the military question, like what happens with the military, and they kind of approached police in the same way. They're like, oh well, we'll just give police to the military, or sorry, we'll give police to the market. We'll give courts to the market. And I was like, hey, well, we could give military to the market too. And I honestly don't know what that's going to look like in reality. It's like this like weird, like mystic, like ethereal kind of thing, because it doesn't exist yet. And it's like an experiment that you can only run in reality. You can't like build models for something like that. But I have my fingers crossed that people will choose the most noble military, and they'll finance the most like upstanding military. And I don't know how many there will be in a system like this. There could be 5, there could be 10, there could be 50. But and then they'll be in constant diplomatic communication with each other and with the city-states that are funding them.
Very interesting stuff. I'm trying to, my mind is like trying to wrap my head around the entire thing, but it's just so, forward thinking. I think that, as you said, it's something that, has never been really attempted before, and you have to learn as you go. But I think that it's a great, way to sort of lay the foundation for the future. And I don't think there's not enough people with their eyes on the future. I think people are very, with all of the fear and the, propaganda that we're seeing right now, people are very drawn to they're being drawn to being, stuck in this state of mind where they can't even prepare for the future. We just are black-pilled. We're just saying, oh my gosh, it's the sky is falling over and over again, just 2 more weeks. But it's so refreshing to hear these ideas and these plans for the future. It gives me, it is very inspiring.
They call that tribulations before the dawning of the new age.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're seeing, genuinely. I think we are seeing a new age begin.
Absolutely. And everyone can participate, too. So the military document is named the Panarchist Constitution because every city-state has the legal right to write and run their own separate constitution. And so in the United States, you could have potentially 1,000 different arcologies, 1,000 different city-states with 1,000 different constitutions. And then within each of those city-states, you have your 3-dimensional airspace, which you have total sovereignty over. So, like, everyone is given the maximum amount of sovereignty. And then in the corporation that you work for, you're earning a % ownership of profit and a % ownership of the corporation. So at every single level, from like global to your bedroom, as much sovereignty is given to as many individuals as possible.
I mean, it truly does sound like a utopia, compared to what we're living in now. It seems like you've taken these components from so many different political beliefs. Like you've almost created like this like smorgasbord of anarchist principles, libertarian principles, constitutionalist principles, and all monarchist principles, and you've tied them all into one system with where we are technologically in this age. And I think it's so perfect because I believe we're entering the age of Aquarius, according to the zodiac, right? And this era is marked by the atomization of everything, right? Ideology, countries, we're seeing this shift where everything is becoming so individualized. And it sounds like the system that you've designed is, would be very good at navigating these waters while the old institutions of the Piscean age are decaying and breaking down. It seems like your concept of arcology is taking the best of everything that we've learned from the last 2,000 years and making it into this forward-thinking plan for the future.
Well, thank you. That's quite the high praise you just gave me there. If you think of like institutions as kind of like their own organisms, mm-hmm. In nature, when an organism gets to a certain size, to a certain scale, then it's no longer in harmony with its environment. It can no longer get enough food. It can no longer like sustain itself. Even like if elephants get any larger, like their bones break under their own weight, right? So institutions are kind of like the same thing. Like if a human is like 7 feet tall, he has a heart attack at 30 years old, stuff like that. So institutions, when they scale, they keep trying to grow because all institutions are like a life form that just wants to like spread its seed, right? Wants to breed and grow. And when it reaches a certain size, it kind of like decays and dies to corruption. And so I kind of like scaled the institutions and gave them their certain features and certain levels so that every single level of society like is kind of well addressed. It's is accounted for and in kind of like what it needs at what scale.
Mm-hmm. And it honestly, like, what you described and how it's all so atomized and individualized, and you can have, you said, all these different constitutions in one arcology. It just reminds me of so much of just like the age of Aquarius, like what it represents. Like the symbol for the age of Aquarius are these little waves, all going in the same pattern with one another. And it's like that is what this sounds like. You've created the motif that can be broken down, sort of like a, almost, it reminds me of like a fractaling, right? And it's like, it just needs this one, governing principle to keep it going, and then it can be reapplied and reapplied and reapplied, and, it's like it can keep replicating itself, rather than the institutions now, which are complete monopolies over how everything is said and done and formed. This is a very like open-ended system, it seems like.
Absolutely, yeah. Like the free market is kind of like fractaled, right? It kind of like fractals out into the world and like addresses societal needs where it can and where it can like make a profit by fulfilling those needs. And so the government is like still kind of a monopoly according to ANCAP principles, but if you can shrink that monopoly down to the city-state level, then even if it goes bad, even if it goes corrupt, it's only affecting that city. It's only starving out that city, or not really starving out, but it's only hurting that city in disharmony. And I'm fully
it rewards those who are within harmony when the current system does not really do so.
Yeah, when you're governed by Washington D.C., like everyone in your city could be like noble and have like a good heart and everything, and it won't matter because you're ruled by 500 corrupt motherfuckers in D.C.
Yes, and they're so disconnected from that geographic area. It's like this, you know, arcology. It's almost like this. It's almost like this multiplication, right? You have like these waves, right? And it's, you know, you're able to sort of repeat these waves any number of times within this system you've created, and it's like it's so hard to articulate, but I visualize it, and it's just like, you know, each little community would be like its own wave, all, you know, flowing with one another rather than, you know, one centralized power system sort of trying to take all the sauce for itself. You know, it seems like you have developed the arc, right, that can sail upon all of these waves, you know, and it's a really neat thing to think about.
Absolutely. It kind of started out as like a commune. It was like the document kind of read like a commune at first. And then
I think that this is what we're going to see in the future. It's like you're going to see all of these little like tribalist communities rather than one giant, you know, New World Order system. I don't buy into any of that. I don't think it's in alignment with you know, the stars. You know, I don't think that's how things are going. I think that what we're seeing right now is almost like this swan song of the dying institutions trying to like cash out and solidify their power throughout this shift. But I don't think that, you know, that's just kicking the can down the road. I don't think ultimately the energies that are at play here of the, you know, the age of Aquarius, it will reward those who look into the, you know, the atomization, the individualization, right? Everything will be very broken down, I think.
And that's a good thing too, because then you have this vision of a world where you can go from town to town, and every town not only looks different but feels different. And like you could have one town that's like a fairy town. Everyone's like a weird fairy. And then you could have another town that's like the Warhammer 40K town. Like everyone just loves Warhammer 40K, and the whole city looks like Warhammer 40K. And
yeah, it reminds me of like when you go to like ancient Sumeria, where like each kingdom is just defined by the deity that they worship, and like that was the governing body of that time. Like there wasn't a king even, you know, back 6,000, 8,000 years ago. They just had this one deity that everyone would worship, and that was enough to keep everyone within, you know, keep everyone in line, because they, you know, they feared the god, they feared that, and that was what defined each community, was this deity they worshipped and the values that were associated with that deity. And it seems like, you know, now with as this new era that we're entering, it's like people are becoming so individualized, they're becoming alien. You know, you have people that are have all of these niche groups that don't fit into the paradigm. You know, it's almost like trying to shove like a circle block into a square hole. You know, everyone is so unique now, and we need a system that appreciates that rather than trying to make everyone into, you know, this corporate, you know, 9-to-5 drone that society quote unquote rewards. You know.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention. So with the affordable housing, you factor in the affordable housing, you factor in the fact that you don't need a personal automobile, and then there's no property taxes for lower income people. So lower income people have $0 property tax, and then you get a UBI on top of that. So when you factor in all of these financial benefits, we will actually be moving to like a 1 or 2 day work week instead of a 5-day work week. So like you'll work 1 day and then have 3 days off, and then work 1 day and then have 3 days off, and that'll be the norm. People will be like, you're gonna tell your children that people used to work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And they'll look at you like, what the fuck were you guys thinking?
It's such an archaic concept, like working 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. It just doesn't, with where we are in terms of automation and technology, it just does not make sense. It's almost like, we just keep the jobs as a system of control, and I'm sure that's the case, because I know like in China they keep certain jobs in regions just to be able to have people doing things and to keep them busy, right? Just fold cardboard boxes all day, and even though it could easily be automated, and it's not serving the individual, it's serving the system.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole system is rotten, and it's been rotten since like probably World War II or earlier than that. Who knows? But this is like the death of the age of the boomer, I think, and it's the rise of the like the internet age. In honesty, what we've been seeing up until this point, what we've been seeing with like the tribulations, is like the birth pangs of the age of the internet. We haven't really entered it yet, and we don't even know what it's going to look like because it's going to be so profoundly different.
It is, and it's like, I think that, embracing it is the best thing you can do rather than try to resist it. And I see, it's like, it is, yeah, the internet is innately an Aquarian technology. It's giving everyone this own personal reality that they're living in, and the system that we exist in currently, the paradigm that we are governing within, does not support that. And that's why we're seeing the decline of institutional power and institutional influence. And the concepts like what you've mentioned within your project Arcology, they string right on harmony with what I see going down in the future of humanity, with having to support all of these little aliens in one system, right? You need to have a system that serves humans rather than humans having to be slaves of this dying paradigm.
Right, all debt slaves. We're all debt slaves to the paper dollar.
Exactly. With this financial system, we are just all debt slaves, and that gets at the very crux of it. As I said earlier, it's like trying to fill up a bucket with holes in it. It's a losing game, really, and the house always wins. Yeah.
So it's a total paradigm shift, and there's so much like it hasn't even started yet. That's what I mean.
No, I think we're like right at the cusp of it. I think that we will see. I'm in my early 20s, and it's like I think in my life I will see the breakdown of this current paradigm, and I hope to see the beginning of the new paradigm and things like you described. But I don't know the exact time frame. I don't think anyone's capable of predicting such a thing. But it's quite clear, I think, to most people that this is the death of the age of Pisces. We are rapidly shifting into the age of Aquarius, where everything becomes air, everything becomes very individualized and almost, very chaotic. So you have to have a system that embraces the uniqueness and the chaos of reality rather than this illusion of order within this false paradigm that we're currently living in.
Yeah, and what's beautiful is we have all these cities to construct, and then the city itself is like a work of art. It becomes the artwork that you embody. And so every single arcology is going to have a very different feel. And me and some friends were actually discussing, like, if we had a bunch of monarchies, little monarchies, who like, what celebrity would have the best kingdom?
Because it's very postmodern, but like that's what it would become. It would be like, these communities would be built around, one or these unifying principles, and celebrities are pretty much like the modern equivalent of icons. They are the gods, right? So similar to like the ancient Sumerian cultures, where they would have entire civilizations dedicated to like Enki, the god of the water, and the father figure of their myth. You'll have an entire civilization built around people like Kanye West, and I believe, isn't this what he's doing? Like Kanye West has all of this land that he's bought, and he wants to start his own little system and commune within that.
He has already. I've seen little videos of it. He has his own little cult, like that surrounds him, and Christianity is at the center too, which is good. I think if you form a cult around like a living person, not only is it a little bit creepy, a little bit weird, but that person is ultimately going to let you down at some point and like disappoint you. And
yeah, we're all human.
Yeah, so not only is it weird, but it's like you're destined for disappointment at least eventually.
So yeah, I mean that's why That's ultimately why most kingdoms of the past have fallen, right? Because of the mortality of their leaders, right? You have kings, they are all just men, regardless of what they tell you.
Yeah, I believe in appointing the successor, not hereditary. The hereditary is just weird.
It is weird. It doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, so like the person who has contributed the most in terms of like ideas and deeds would be appointed as the successor. That's a much better, more enlightened way of doing monarchy.
Yeah, and it's like that the systems that are hereditary, they're all built, of kingdoms. They're all built to maintain the bloodline. But it's like what you're describing is much more decentralized, and it's not governed by just one person or one particular bloodline or family.
Yeah. The monarch is only in charge of the state. He's not in charge of private property. He's not in charge of your family or your business or anything like that.
As it should be.
Yeah,
but I mean,
absolutely.
dude, it's been great learning more about arcology. We've got about maybe 15 more minutes. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners?
So the hexagon system, right? It not only is it cheap from being repetitive, but engineers also know exactly where every column is and every column will be. And so they can build what we call modules that connect to the hexagons, and they could be like anything. And once you design one of these modules, you can actually mass produce it as a product and then offer that product to the world. So now the entire world has access to this module for every single arcology that exists in the world. And it's affordable because it's being mass produced in a factory somewhere. And so our lived environment, our cities, actually turn into this like crazy living machine.
It almost reminds me of like the RuneScape economy or something like that, where it's where people are just buying and selling all these cosmetic items, but it's on this market platform. It truly will reward innovation, I believe.
Oh my, it's gonna be so crazy. I think honestly, in 10 or 15 years time, we will have arcologies that from a distance, they look like an organism made out of just giant pieces of steel. And they move and everything. And they actually comes to life. And they're the size of skyscrapers. Like we're gonna be living in fucking robots of our own invention.
Mm-hmm. It almost reminds me of like Dune with like those giant spacecrafts that everyone lives in.
Yeah,
it's like the early form of that before we actually are a space-bound civilization where we're still tethered to the terrain of Earth. It's almost like these are like they are the arcs. They really are. You're wanting to create these giant self-sustaining living systems.
Yeah, it really is kind of like an organism. And for the longest time, I described them as the USB of skyscrapers, which is kind of what it is. Like, we can't live without USB. It's just such a brilliant idea, right? Everything is compatible with everything else. So if you design a skyscraper in this way, then now all of your skyscraper pieces are compatible with all your other skyscraper pieces. And you can, anyone, a child, a middle school kids, can design their own three-dimensional cities in CAD software, in 3D software, without any real technological skill sets, any real structural engineering skill sets, without construction experience, because of this modular, repetitive nature.
Mm-hmm. And that's how you designed arcology, right? You used 3D rendering software?
Yeah, I use Blender, which is free, and it was kind of lousy a few years ago, but they've done some major upgrades to it, so it's actually really nice now.
Mm-hmm. And like with how accessible all of these things are, it almost reminds me like of the 3D printing market, where it's all of this open source code, and you can just download it and you can just print it off and then have it physically there in front of you. It's almost like that, but then taking that and applying it to an entire system and society and governing body.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I actually started learning Blender because I bought a 3D printer. That's why. And then I was like, hey, I already know how to use this 3D software. I'm going to design some skyscrapers. And I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole by accident.
Well, I don't think it's by accident. I think there's a reason for it, right? I think people are going to, regardless if they find your stuff, I think you are on the cutting edge of like what the future will look like. It's this very, fully atomized, living in harmony with one another and all of the diversity and chaotic nature of the age of Aquarius, right? Everyone will be so wrapped up in their own individualized world, but we have to have this governing sequence. Like it's almost the Fibonacci sequence. It's within everything. It's like this fingerprint. And I think what you've designed is this fingerprint that can be repeated and reapplied, and to keep everything within the same harmony with one another, the same rhythm with one another, but allow for the flexibility and diversity that we are seeing break down the current paradigm. Because the paradigm we have right now is breaking down because of this diversity, but your system that you designed is powered and strengthened by it.
Yeah, writing a constitution is almost like trying to tame chaos magic or trying to understand chaos magic, and it's like you're like wrestling with the unknown.
It's very slippery.
It's super slippery, and you're trying not to break anything. You're trying to patch all of the holes, all of the, if there's like a joint that doesn't quite work very well, you're trying to like get that right or get the wording right or get the specifics right of that specific area of the machine. And then if something goes wrong, if you have one piece missing, the whole thing kind of like falls apart.
Truly. Well, man, I appreciate you coming on here. I think this has been a good episode. It's been very interesting. We haven't really had an episode really talking about subjects like this. It's much less woo and much more practical, I would say. And it's good to keep your eyes towards the future and, building the world that you'd like to see. I think that so many people in positions of power right now, they're boomers. And, one thing, if you talk to a boomer about all of the impending doom that we are seeing with our current system, they'll just always tell you the same line. They'll say, oh, well, I'm just glad I'll be dead by the time that this gets bad or gets weird, right? But we are seeing innovation being born. It's like a phoenix, through the collapse of one system, a new system will come that is more finely tuned to the zeitgeist of that time, the spirit of that time. And it's like the things you've been describing, I mean, they've strung my heartstrings, right? I feel that this is the future, and I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your project with all of us. And, where can people want to find more about Arcology if they're interested?
Well, I'll send you a link so you could throw it up in the podcast. And then it's the YouTube channel is Traveling Through Time, and you can also type into the search bar Arcology with a K, and then space V7, which is the main tech demo video.
Perfect. Well, man, I appreciate you coming on here today. It was a great episode. It was fun to learn more about Arcology, and I encourage everyone who's interested to go check out your YouTube channel, Traveling Through Time. And if you'd like to support the show, feel free to go to our new website. It is chapelperilous.xyz. On there, you can find a complete list of all of the podcasts that we've done in the past. You can find our Patreon. You can also find our gift shop, which we now have merch. We have T-shirts, we have sweaters, we have all sorts of things themed with the memes and the I call it mimetic merch. It's some interesting stuff. I've had a lot of great people working on that with me, so make sure to check that out. And we also have a book club coming up. If you're interested in joining our book club, we have a page on our chapelperilous.xyz website discussing our book club. We will be meeting bi-weekly on Sundays, and the first book we'll be reading is Prometheus Rising. And we're getting that started right now. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Discord or send me an email. But it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you all for listening today. And, keep on pondering, everyone. Peace and love.
Thanks.